Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz. As ever, I am the IT Geek. Welcome back to what is, I believe, episode 6, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, episode 6. It's just all the episodes are going to blur into one soon, I'm sure. So last episode we covered part 1 of external collaboration. This episode we're going to cover episode 2. Before we get started, obviously, I have to welcome my good friend and co-partner, Dwayne Natwick. Hi, Dwayne.
Hey Shabaz, how are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Doing well today. Yeah, if we lose track of the number of episodes, we'll just look down at the YouTube channel and
Yeah.
the description will let us know.
Exactly. Excellent. So yeah, we're having great fun working on this together. It's obviously for those who don't know, me and Dwayne. Dwayne wrote the book, and I technically reviewed it for him. So we were working on that project together, which was great. So it's nice to come full circle, isn't it, Dwayne, and actually do a YouTube series on that same topic.
Oh yeah, definitely fun. Yeah, keep me you can honest on the book. Keep me honest here as well.
Excellent. So excellent. Let's get started then. So this is module 1 still. So this is probably about halfway through the module, which is implementing identities in Azure AD. So we are going to cover the following topics here, as I mentioned. This is the second part of the external identities, implementing and managing external identities. So we're going to look at manage external user accounts in Azure Active Directory. We're also going to look at configuring identity providers, so your socials and SAML and WS-Fed. And then Dwayne will take us through another good demo of managing those guest users in Azure Active Directory. Okay, so Dwayne obviously showed us how to invite users. Now they're invited, they've accepted. Let's try and manage them, okay? So I want to recap a few things. So we talked about different states of accounts or different states of identity. So I want to recap those. So we looked at state 1, which was external Azure AD. State 2, so external Azure AD was someone from an external Azure Active Directory. The other one was a Microsoft account, so this could be a social media account of some sort, so Microsoft, Google, or something like that. We then had directory synced, which was that third state, so that's on the partner side. They are homed in Active Directory domain services, be it on-premises or VM in Azure. And then that syncs through via Azure AD Connect up into their Azure AD tenant, and then you send that B2B invitation. Third and final one was a cloud-only account. Okay, so this is just a partner Azure AD tenant saying you're inviting them across. So a couple of key properties. The first one being user type property. I've mentioned that a few times, that especially with guest users, their user type is guest. So I just wanted to cover this in a little bit of detail. Okay, so there are 2 types of user types within Azure AD. The first one is a member. It's like someone from the NHS, but anyway, it's a member. So this value indicates a user of a host organization, and the user is considered internal to your organization. Okay, so again, they work for your company, they're internal. So they'd have access to internal sites, internal resources by default, and they have a UPN that is your domain. We then have that guest user type. Okay, so this is what we've mentioned so far quite a bit. So this value indicates a user who isn't considered internal to your company. So they're an external collaborator, could be a partner who you're working on a project, could be a vendor, could even be a client of yours who you're giving access to some sort of resource, be it Teams or SharePoint or whatever. Such user is not expected to receive any sort of internal memos that you might send out or any sort of company benefits, for example. Okay, so they are literally just a guest. So another sort of key property I want to talk about is this emphasis on source. There's different sources of guest users. I don't mean ketchup and mustard. I mean where they are. That's got to be classed as a dad joke, hasn't it, Dwayne? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. Yes, definitely.
I don't like doing dad jokes. Sorry, I apologise.
Sorry. Keep it light.
So as far as the source location goes, we have an invited user. Okay, so this user has been manually invited or bulk invited, but hasn't yet redeemed an invitation. We then have that external Azure Active Directory. So this is a user homed in an external organization, and they authenticate by using an Azure AD account that belongs to another organization. Okay, so this is what we covered in state 1. That Microsoft account, as I mentioned, this is a user homed in Microsoft account, and it authenticates by using that Microsoft account or Google account. Okay, so this is again a key property. And again, we go back to that on-premises AD. So they're homed in a Windows Active Directory, and again, this type of sign-in, it corresponds with the external Azure AD that we mentioned. So that's that second state that we mentioned. Finally, we have the sort of key property of Azure AD, and this is again external Azure AD, and you invite them in. So a couple of key elements around external user accounts I want to cover on. So we've first got this convert user type. Okay, so it is possible to convert user types from a member to a guest and vice versa. You do this via PowerShell. Okay, however, that user type property represents that user's relationship to the organization, so you do need to be careful. So you should change property only if the relationship to that user has changed. So, okay, say Dwayne, we work for the same company, Dwayne, and we've got a partnership with a client. If Dwayne moves to that client, we can convert his user from a member to a guest, because he's no longer, he no longer gets that sort of member access. He is now classified as a guest. It's not recommended to change this user type by PowerShell as an atomic activity. Also, in the case of this property becomes immutable by using PowerShell, they don't recommend taking a dependency of this value. Okay, so just a couple of things to note when you are dealing with changing the user type.
Another use case around this user type is a merger and acquisition, right? Or somebody moving from. I'm going through this same process similarly right now. I'm moving from a child company to the parent company. So all my credentials, I'm a guest user on the I'm a Google user that's a guest on the Azure AD tenant right now, but I am transitioning to be an Azure AD user member on that tenant. So that's they're going to have to convert me somewhere along the line. I just made sure this morning that they weren't going to change my user ID, change over.
So just to our viewers, that just proves that this theory that we're talking about happens in real life. There's Dwayne's just given a real life example. He's going through a very similar situation. So all this theory we're talking about is actually real life as well. So, good example of that. So another key element is changing guests. There's some user limitations as well. Okay, so there may be cases where you want to give guest users higher privileges. So you can add a guest user to a role and even remove those default user restrictions in the directory to give that user the same privileges as a member. It's possible to turn off default limitations as well. And you can remove limitations through the user settings that Dwayne was showing us in Azure AD. We are going to be looking at managing guest users in Azure AD later in the demo. As you've seen again in the demos, with Azure AD, it's a single pane of glass. So you see all members and guest members in one list. You can filter those, so just to view guest members, so it's possible to do that. So that last sort of key element I wanted to touch on was this dynamic group collaboration, okay? And Dwayne obviously showed dynamic groups earlier. So dynamic configuration of security group membership of Azure AD is available through the Azure portal, as we saw. So they can set those rules and do that dynamic group collaboration for guests as well. So it's not just members that can use dynamic groups, it's guests as well. And that helps give them access to maybe SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive or something. So now I just want to move forward and talk about configuring identity providers. Okay, and there are two ways, or there are a few different ways in which you can set up that sort of direct federation with an organization. First is through what we call security assertion markup language, or better known as SAML. And configuring identity providers support SAML. So SAML is, again, it can be used where you want to partner with like a sort of third-party cloud app. Maybe you can configure SAML to do that sort of single sign-on process, and the same is for WSFed as well. So these are both sort of protocols that when you set up direct federation with a partner's identity provider, new guest users from the domain can use their own identity managed account. And it's SAML and WS-Fed that sort of facilitate this. So just a few points I want to talk about regarding limitations with federation. So first one being DNS verification, DNS verified domains in Azure AD. So the domain you want to federate must not be DNS verified in Azure AD. So you're not allowed to set up direct federation with unmanaged Azure AD. So you're only allowed to set up direct federation with unmanaged Azure AD tenants because they aren't DNS verified. So that's one thing to note. Second limitation, direct federation is only allowed for policies where the authentication URL domain matches the target domain as well. Okay, so just need to be careful with those authentication URLs. So third limitation that I want to talk about is signing certificate renewals. So if you specify the metadata URL in the identity provider settings, Azure AD will automatically renew the signing certificate when it expires. However, if the certificate is rotated for any reason before the expiration time, or if you don't provide that metadata URL, Azure AD will be unable to automatically renew. So just be careful and when you're using that signing certificate renewal. Fourth thing I wanted to touch on was federation relationship limits. I think one of the couple of first episodes, we talked about, when you're adding domains, I think it was 900 domains, something daft like that. Currently, the maximum of federation relationships is 1,000 is supported. And again, that number must have come from somewhere. They must have got to like 990 and thought, right, we need to put a limit on this. And let's just pick 1,000. So this limit includes both internal federation and direct federation. Okay, so that's 1,000 federation limit. Finally, Microsoft doesn't currently support direct federation with multiple domains from the same tenant. So just be wary of that as well when you are taking the exam. Could be a gotcha. It's got a gotcha exam question written all over it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Just want to touch on, again, using Google as an identity provider for B2B guests. So it's obviously by setting up federation with Google, you can allow invited users to your shared apps and resources by using their Gmail accounts. I think, Dwayne, you mentioned you're kind of in a scenario where you've got a Gmail account, using that as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
When you send an invitation to Google Gmail users, the guest should access your shared apps and resources using a link that includes the tenant context. So the experience varies depending on whether you've already signed into Google or not, okay? Guest users who are not signed into Google will be prompted to do so. Guest users who are already signed into Google, maybe on a different tab, will be prompted to choose the account they want to use, okay? So then they need to choose which account they want to use. So similar to Google, you can use Facebook as an identity provider for business to business. So you can add Facebook to your self-service sign-up user flows. It's currently in preview, I believe. So users can sign into your applications using their own Facebook accounts. I personally don't use Facebook, so I wouldn't want to do this. But people might do, and they might want to use their Facebook accounts. Okay, it allows users to sign in using Facebook, and you need to be enabled self-service sign-in. Okay, so it needs to have self-service sign-in. After you add Facebook as an identity provider, you can set up that user flow for the application and select Facebook as one of the sign-in options. So yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to cover theory-wise. And again, you've all been dying to stop hearing my voice. I will hand over to Dwayne to cover off a good demo about managing Azure AD Guests. Over to you, Dwayne.
Yeah. So, we're getting into, getting deep into the external identities and how we manage those. I talked about a little bit about those when we were adding users in the previous modules demo. But if we go to external identities, there's a lot that we can do to manage those external identities. We can, we've got the collaboration settings. We talked about those. We've talked about in the previous demo. So I'm not gonna go through that again. But what we want to allow, what we want to do in those external identities is all within those collaboration settings. The identity providers, as Shabaz mentioned, we've got Google in here. I've already gone through and done the setup Google, and what you need to do when we're doing any kind of federation. When we're federating those settings, it's we are really creating that trust relationship, and we're creating that connection point between the one identity provider and another. So we need to essentially link those accounts. So there's some things you have to do within Google, and information you provide from Azure AD within your Google account, and vice versa. You need to provide then that Google information in your Azure account to link that all together and create that trust relationship. So if you're not an admin to your Google account, you can't do, you're going to need to work with an admin at that level. Same thing with Facebook. For your Facebook account, you need to be able to federate those and to get a client ID and a client secret from your face account to be able to link that information. Same thing you can see with different identity providers. We can, if they're using the SAML or the WS Fed, which if most internet based identity providers at this point are using one of those types of protocols, we can then bring that into those profiles as well. See, I've got, one-time passcode, I've got Azure Active Directory, I've got Microsoft account in here as well, because that's federated. Those pretty much come as defaults when that federation's already in place. It's really adding like Google, Facebook, or any other identity provider. Maybe you're using AWS. You can utilize that as well. Not to get too much into the other hyperscalers. If we come back to the overview here and just kind of step through here, self-service sign up. This, we can set up user flows to allow somebody to sign up and sign in and have that. And I've set up, there's a flow here for Google. So if somebody does have a Google account, we've set up that identity provider that allows them then to sign up and sign in to our account. So we need to make sure in our collaboration settings, if that is the case, and if we're going to allow that, we need to make sure that we're putting our restrictions within here and our levels of access. That's where we really it's going to be important in terms of how we're managing and how we're watching over and making sure that that we're not getting potentially dangerous users to our accounts. Inviting those external users, we talked about in the previous, inviting guests. Conditional access policies are going to help us govern over that. I'm not going to get into setting up a conditional access policy. We'll have other modules that get into that. Setting up access reviews as we govern over those users. Do those users need permanent access to our tenant, to our environment? No. So we're going to have access reviews. We'll talk more about that when we get into the governance of identities. We're going to do a lot of that. Another way to manage what they have access to is through permissions management or entitlement management, which we'll talk about in another module as well. Those all become very important as we start inviting more and more people that aren't members to our tenant. We can, if anybody's having any problems, we've got diagnostics here for finding common problems and getting guidance for somebody that might be a guest user and saying, hey, I can't access, I'm invited, but I'm getting an error when I log in. There's a lot of troubleshooting techniques all within here and allow us to work within the environment. Again, access reviews are going to become a very important piece to governing our external users. Setting up an access review, having somebody internal, a member user, reviewing the need for those external users to continue to have access to the. So those are some ways that we can manage our external identities and be very flexible, but also govern over it is going to be extremely important. think that covers it for now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Another really good demo there. And that brings us to an end on the external collaboration part of the module. That we've covered 2 parts there, covered quite a bit of content. Now that the next 4 videos are going to be around hybrid identity, just because that is such a big topic, and that's where we're going to get into some really good demos. We've got some really good demos planned for you. So again, thank you very much for watching. Please keep on subscribing. All our socials are going to be in the description. A link to the GitHub as well, which is all in all the descriptions, to where the labs are. And a link, the most important bit, a link to Dwayne's book on the SC300 identity exam. Buy that book and follow that along with us. Okay, so again, thank you for watching. Thank you for support. Hit that subscribe button. Come on.
Yeah.
Hit that subscribe button. And thank you, everybody. And until next time, goodbye.
Have a great day.